And we'll do presentation mode. Hey, all right, can you see that all right?
Yeah, that's much better. And it's great to see your face in the presentation. So that's even better than
Yeah,
last night.
it was very strange not to
See us,
know
because we
who.
were all nodding and smiling and laughing in the background, but you couldn't see that.
But that's how I normally am. It's like, presenting to outer space. Okay. All right. Well, then okay. Right. So we're ready. Okay. So, hi, everybody. My name is Kate Howe, and I'm a member of the Wild Parlour, though I haven't been here in a little while. I've been off, sort of doing some other things. Um, but the Wild Parlour has always been a really important part of my practice, and so I jumped at the chance to come back and sort of share what practice meant to me and how this group had helped me sort of solve the riddle of my practice, if you will. So I'm an American artist and writer living between London and Leeds. I graduated in 2022 from the RCA in painting, and I'm currently at the end of my first year in a practice-led PhD at the University of Leeds. And this is a trigger warning. I talk about sexual violence and trauma in this presentation, though not as much as I do in others. Right. So just prepare yourself. If you need any help or support or resources, I have a list of resources in the UK that I can paste into the chat or send to you if you want them. So the last time that I presented to the Wild Parlour was in January of 2023. I was getting ready to apply for my PhD. I had planned to apply at Ruskin as a and also to a backup to another school, but like Ruskin. And Jonathan had suggested Leeds as the backup. So the only problem was that I needed help distilling and understanding my practice. Because when you do a PhD, you're meant to come with a question that sort of adds to the existing body of research. So there's a body of research and there's a dangling participle. There's somewhere to go, and you're meant to ask a question that kind of like a virus just sort of plops on and adds the next sort of pocket of research. And I didn't have that. I didn't really know what my practice was talking about or what it was doing or what it could create. Um, so the first thing that the Wild Parlour really helped me do was to speak. I got lots of encouragement, but no clarity, which is quite a Wild Parlour sort of thing. What I was asking was, what do you guys think my practice is focused on, preoccupied with? What is already in here in this big miasma of me that I'm not seeing, and maybe you guys are seeing, that I could turn into a question so I can have some sort of a track to keep exploring? And this is the floor of my studio, and we'll sort of revisit this a little bit later, but we get here as a teaser. So I spent my presentation that I did in 2023 essentially reading a really long text that I had written and had come out hoping for clarity. And the clarity that I arrived at was that there was something essential that I was missing about my job as an artist. So something about the brief of the artist that I wasn't understanding well, though I have been an artist my entire life. And my mother was a painter, and my father was an opera singer. And so I grew up in a life in the arts, and still there was this not understanding, this not knowing, this slipperiness about what it was or how it was that I was supposed to do. I had been thinking that the world needed to have a hand in telling me what I should be doing, rather than asking myself what I was interested in and how that might show up in the world. I think that part of the issue was that I am a very literal person, and though I had heard things like practice needs to be authentic and practice needs to be you, I didn't understand how, if I felt that way already, something else could be needed, or what else it might be that was needed, or how to order things that were me into a place that meant it was practice. Eventually, I would get a diagnosis to add to my collection of neurodiversities that would help me understand and navigate the puzzle of what the brief was and why it felt so much like I needed a brief. Because it turns out that I'm not only dyslexic and, oh, see, so you switch aside. It turns out that I'm not only dyslexic and ADD, but also autistic. And it wasn't until I got that diagnosis that I understood that I understood that I understand and process things in a way that is atypical. Understanding this helped me to stop apologizing for who I am and for how I am. And it helped me to understand that my incredible need to communicate in a way that lets me know I'm not being misunderstood is a way of speaking the world back to itself, a way of knowing if I am real, if I am present, if I exist at all. And those of you who were with us in that presentation might have noticed that my driving fear had always been that I will wake up one day only to realize that I have never existed at all. The diagnosis changed that for me. It turns out I do exist. This is, I think, the product of trauma plus neurodiversity, and we know that these things hold hands and inform each other. When I finished with my presentation, I had two clear lines of thought. One was that I love transformation of space, and that I feel that the agency of an artwork to make space translate itself into other might be an appropriately heady and intelligent thing to study. The other thought was that I needed somehow to get away from my lifelong desire to talk about what I would now call socialized gendered violence of the everyday. And what I then thought of was kind of my feminist bummer hangover. So, how to reconcile the two? With the deadline for Ruskin Fast approaching, I did the things that I know feed my practice, but I did them aimlessly, without trust, without yet the understanding that it is this very following of your curiosities that is practice itself. Today, I would say that my practice includes many practices, the first one being the caretaking of my mental and emotional health, the second being the caretaking of the physical body, and then living in a space where the conditions are continually met that allow the work to arise. Allowing myself without apology to explore my own impulses and curiosities without justification or judgment. This meant going to the Wallace collection to sit in front of 12 little Rubens sketches that I found there. I was still ashamed at this point to be in love with Rubens, or to call him my own. Rubens, Titian, Tintoretto, I didn't understand that I was building a lineage, inserting myself into the lineage, and that the act of looking, close looking, copying, being with, spending time with, hanging out with Rubens. I used to tell my partner when I left, like, I'm going to go, where are you going? I'm going to go hang out with Rubens. That these were acts of accumulation and camaraderie, that I was folding myself into the line. I kept looking up to see if I should go this way or that, only to be met with silence. And this silence was ultimately the best gift that could have been. I needed to sort this one out for myself. And that is also the literal issue. No one's practice can or should ever be defined by somebody else. It is of, by, through you, and only you. And this is why some practices are not popular in their lifetime, because the artist is following their own line of inquiry, and the art market might not be interested in that inquiry at that time. To move over to what the market wants means to step outside of your authentic self and create objects for the consumption of contemporary taste. What a conundrum. Like many people, I had been hoping that what I was putting out there would be heard, read, understood by someone who knew more about the art world than I did and could tell me, your work is about this. Head that way. I met big hitters way, way, way too early in the process. Some people who came to the studio who had the ability to pick me up and make me famous, or not. And I met them when I was still worried that people like me or not, and when I was still thinking that to have a gallery was to have someone who helps you understand yourself. Ultimately, my relationship with these places is intact, but it did my work no service, or perhaps a great service, to be squeezed into the impossible condition of make work good enough to be chosen. As I wandered through the next few weeks trying to make sense of myself, my practice, my purpose, and I wondered if I would ever paint again, honestly, and what the paper meant, these large installations that I was building out of waxed craft paper, and how they related to painting, and how performance related to any of that, and all the disparate things that I was doing. My life, myself, my person is prismatic. So how to justify everything I was doing to myself? Like a tyrannical filter, I could and should only do things if I could see why I was doing them. I took myself to the theater because one thing that had become clear to me was that going to the theater fed my practice. Going to PVs bled it, and now I know that that is largely to high social anxiety due to autism and overstimulation. But going to shows with friends and seeing work with friends opens it. At this point, my practice was the practice of feeling calm, open, and interested in working. Even if I was unsure of how to work or why to work or what to work on, I knew that if I kept working toward living the conditions that allow the work, that nebulous thing, to arise, it was more likely that it would. At this point, I was also living with several health conditions that we didn't fully understand. One was a compression of the vagal nerve in my neck due to the several surgeries that I've had. So my deep musculature was irritated and inflamed and pressing on this nerve, causing something called cervical angina. Angina is heart pain. Cervical angina is pain in the heart coming from nerves in the neck and the cervical spine. Essentially, I had been experiencing neurological heart attacks for much of the day, every day, since 2017 when I had entered cancer treatment. Honestly, when I say that out loud, I just think, like, I'm so stubborn. I was walking around London, going to school, riding the bus, passing out, and it's fine, it's all good. Heart attack. Okay. It's a very long story how we got from there to here, but teasing apart these health issues helped me reduce the number of sudden reasons why I couldn't go to something. With my physical health more stable and my vagal nerve no longer continuously compromised, this makes you feel like you're having like cascading anxiety attacks at the same time as heart attacks, because your vagal nerve basically regulates your fight or flight and your parasympathetic nervous system and how you respond and show up in the world. So it makes palpitations and sweating and anxiety and gut problems and all of it. It regulates all of that, and it was pinched. So no wonder I felt scattered. I also found out that I have acute chronic pancreatitis. So I could get my neck to be uninflamed through body work, and then I could change my diet and slowly and carefully rebuild my strength. And then I began to see where I could move and work and live in the world, where there was room for me. I had been a fairly robust athlete until about 2017, 2018. So going from super healthy and able to climb tall mountains in a single bound to being totally bedbound with complex health conditions was confusing. I hated that it defined me in the world. I worried that I was seen as ill and flaky. I worried that the art world was ableist. I worried that the art world was ageist. I worried that the art world was motherist. I worried that the art world was anti-feminist. I worried a lot. And less, since my vagal nerve is not compressed. So once we had so I worried that I was seen as ill and flaky, and I had difficulty not foregrounding that as I made apology after apology. So once we teased these separate health things apart, I was able to see and feel myself in there again, but I had changed, and school had changed me. My failure to close with a gallery had changed me. My understanding of my body had changed me, and the world had changed. We were now firmly in a post-Me Too era. Pamela Anderson was about to walk the red carpet in Cannes wearing no makeup. I was about to surrender performing my gender and engaging with that act. My subject, you see, was pursuing me. I was an artist who did not know what practice was, who did not have a subject, who wanted to do a PhD because I was craving the research structure or the institutional structure from within which to make work. Of course, this is not a great place to apply for anything for a grant, a gallery, a PhD. I needed very much to keep my student loans in forbearance. I've been bankrolling my studio out of them, so I applied for an MA in creative writing at Kingston University down the street from the studio. The cost of living that the American government loans or loaned until yesterday at about 3% interest would cover the rent at Rupture. Rupture, by the way, is the experimental art and exhibition space that I've run out of my studio since December of 2020. And it exists as a physical answer to questions that Jonathan posed to my CHS group in October of 2020, online via Zoom. The art world is dying. It is a space stuck in commodity. Everything looks the same. Nothing is new. What are you gonna do to change it? How does it need changing? What do artists need now? What does the art world need now? How does the image arise? And what are the conditions that allow it to arise? At this point, I had no idea how the art world could be broken or what someone like me could do to change it. The most important changes historically to the arts, he said, have been made by collectives and movements. Wild Parlour. People who come together to discuss what matters to them and work according to their own agendas. Incredibly exciting, but how to get there? How to know what the art world needed if I didn't know what I needed? So Rupture began as an answer to those questions in relation to myself and those immediately around me, because I couldn't travel around very much, but I did find this big, empty, cheap space in Southwest London where whoever wanted could chuck a bunch of stuff in the window and we could all work together. At that point, everything was still closed, and what I thought we needed was a place to show and talk about our work. Over the years, a lot of people tried to convince me that my space should be this or should be that, but I knew that it had to stay a working studio so that when I had a working practice, I would have space to work. I remember walking down the street in 2021 full of doubt about everything, from mental to physical health to my own capacity to my ability to keep financing this ridiculous thing. How would future Kate feel? What would future Kate, who had worked all this shit out, feel like walking down this same sidewalk? Would they walk with confidence? What would they be wearing? How old would they be? Would I even still be here? Would there come a time that this space and I would meet each other firmly in alignment, and that all that doubt would pass? That I would know what practice was, what my practice was? Would there come a time when painting would feel just as urgent, but from a place of impulse, through the diagram of my practice, rather than the mechanism of need, producing an anxiety that maybe this one would be the thing that I figured out? John Stretton had said, "It's not the next clever idea." Pam Golden had said, "Only you can say if your work is good or not." John Slice had said, "I find that Neil Young is the answer." Jerry Saltz had said, "Just get to work, you big baby." Stretton said, "You are already doing it in your writing." Phil Allen said, "We buy what we like, and we like what we are familiar with. Painting what you think will say, painting what you think will sell is painting your own death." Jonathan said COVID was an epoch, a rupture, and that's where we get our name. And so the place kept evolving as a clarification machine for my practice and the small fluid community forming inside of it. Sally Minns joined Rupture at Christmas in 2023, right before I gave my last talk here. A painter, trained formerly at Heatherley's, And stuck in the wasteland limbo of Wimbledon studios, she was living the same problems so many of us have faced in our creative development, and we shone like mirrors at each other. I entered the creative writing program to see what it was that I was already doing in my writing, and Sally and I went to the theater. The theater is where I feel closest to my dad, who I was very close to. He was an opera singer and he died when I was 15 years old. I did not see him a lot between the ages of 6 and 15, and he was, in my mind, a refuge from that other parent, the dreaded stepfather and abusive misogynist. This becomes important because it was from him that I learned what a woman should be, how I should perform my gender, what my worth was, who I was for, what I should do to fulfill that. As an autistic person, when I understand the what, the why, and the how, I'm then set free on the path to complete the task. It's my favorite thing. So I had been exceptionally programmable. I mean, we all are because society makes it such, but an autistic person is that much more so. Without the ability to really read and check how things are landing, we make a jillion calculations a minute trying to fulfill our part of the social contract so that we can carry on doing other things. This activity, the fulfilling of the social contract, took up most of my imagination for most of my life. It had only been in writing that I was alone and unobserved enough to actually create. This is why Strutton saw that I was doing it in my writing already, and why I struggled in the world of visual art, though I could not let go of wanting to express myself in this way. So I'm in this MA creative writing course, and now Sally and I, two opposite halves of a whole, neurodivergent and neurotypical, athlete and solicitor, both moms, both in our 50s, have found each other. And we're off to the theater because I can't paint and I can't write, and my application, now titled How Art Translates Space into Sense and Language and Investigation of Space as Translatable Language, is still boring and not complete. Excuse me. We go to see Ulster American by David Ireland because, if nothing else, going to the theater sets my brain back on the tracks. Everything about theater makes sense to me. Probably because, as an autistic person, I have used the mechanisms that the theater taught me to navigate the world. Probably because I see my father in the theater. Probably because scale makes sense to me, and rule breaking, and the temporal moment not recorded in a static position, but activated and reactivated, resonate and order my thinking. In my creative writing class, in my creative writing class, I've been exposed to critical theory for literature. I have a book that they gave me called Critical Theory. And I wonder, from the moment I begin the course, why we didn't have this book at the RCA in the painting course. Everything about the creative process is clearer to me in writing, because I've always written in secret, but I've never painted in secret. Painting always seemed like something you were supposed to show. Writing always roamed across the show and reveal, personal, public, diaristic. There are so many forms in writing. Now I was seeing that I could read against the grain, or push two kinds of things up against each other and let them shout at each other. I took a class called Sex and Text, which has recently been axed along with the rest of the Kingston Humanities cuts. But this course blew my mind open, exposing me to all kinds of ways that we talk about and engage in sex in text across centuries of writing. I had thought that I would learn how to write less cringy and more interesting sex scenes, and what I found instead is a way to interrogate and respond to the world. Suddenly, Strutton's words came alive for me again. You are already doing it in your writing. So Sally and I go to see Ulster American, and I'll just read you how the show opens. So it's another trigger warning. I'll just give you a short taste for how this begins. It's the story of a playwright, her lead actor, and her director. And they're coming together to actually produce this play in the West End. So the actor, Jay, was played by Woody Harrelson. We saw it twice. It was so good. It was so good. It was so good. Anyway, so it was just what a treat. So, and then Lee Carver. Now, I don't know. This is the cast. So this guy, I don't know who played. He played Lee Carver, but I don't remember what his name is. But he's quite famous here in the UK. And then she's from the Dairy Girls, and she played Ruth, the playwright. Highly recommended. All right. So imagine this. Sally and I are sitting in the theater, Riverside Studios. It's a fundraiser to keep the theater alive, and the lights go out. And again, trigger warnings due to language. Okay, lights go out and lights come up. London, present day, Lee Carver's living room. It's Sunday evening around 8 p.m. Jay and Lee sit on a sofa. Jay drinks a cup of chamomile tea. Lee drinks red wine. The lights come up and Jay says, "Is there homophobia in Hollywood? Of course. And misogyny? How can we deny it? It's reflected in so much of our output, narrative upon narrative centered around the abuse of women, the violent abuse of women, and racism. Only a fool could pretend otherwise. We've come a long way since Stepin Fetchit. Fuck, we've come a long way since Poitier, but still." And Lee interrupts and says, no, I agree with what you're saying. And Jay turns to him and says, "You ever use the N-word?" That is the third line in. Like, we get thrown into this conversation. I mean, the third word in this script is homophobia. And it starts as a question, is there homophobia in Hollywood? So all of the resistance that I had been feeling toward my subject, which had been galloping around the world and pursuing me, met me in the first paragraph in Woody Harrelson's opening lines of this play. And it goes on to become very much about how these two men control and form, or try to control and form, the work, the creative work of this brilliant writer, Ruth, who's a young woman, and how it's sort of insidiously done, and they keep insisting that they're not trying to form her, and yet they are. So I got slapped across the face with Ulster American. By the time that we left the theater, my heart was hammering in my chest in a new way. I was desperate to write, and I knew that my PhD topic was bullshit, and that I had been turning away from my subject for far too long. And perhaps it's true for lots of people. Your subject pursues you throughout your life, and you either turn to face it or you keep turning away from it. When I got back to my studio, I stood there and I realized that since I first went to the National Gallery and engaged with Gentileschi's Susanna and the Elders in 2020 in her solo show there, which is what my grad piece at the RCA was in response to, which is what had drawn those rare creatures, the blue chip gallerists, to my studio and to my work in the first place, I have been wondering about how there can be so much violence in art and why we don't see it as violence. In 2021, a friend of mine wrote a book called Every Rape in the Met Museum. She had done it as a procrastination project, and I'm fucking jealous of someone that focused and clear. I emailed her to ask how she would feel about me following her work at the National Gallery or another place, but responding to it in a different form, and she said, go for it. And so, with 12 hours to go, I sat down and I wrote my application for Ruskin. Collecting rape. Identifying, collating, and responding to every object in the V&A Museum and Archives that takes rape as its subject. Thanks, Ulster American. I needed to be shoved off the cliff of my own rage by seeing that perfect piece of writing. In that work, I saw myself, every female creative, and the lie of control that we all labor under. I didn't know what form my work would take. And the next question that I had was, how in the world can and will I respond to all of this stuff? I'm not even sure of painting. I know that I build templums as parts of Susanna, this response to Susanna, but how will that keep working? I mean, what does the paper even mean? I was still pretty squarely sure that I needed to justify my choices to myself, which is useful for a while, as I can be quite a ping pong, but I needed to get past that and just into working and trusting the work. But how to get there? How to get there? I was getting closer. Just admitting that I had to talk about rape, survival, and the fact that no one seems to notice that this was and had been the shameful preoccupation of my life, and therefore by necessity that of my practice, was a huge step in the right direction. We are interested in what we are interested in. Now, how to talk about that seems to matter to me most without turning it into art therapy or outright activism. I mean, these were my big concerns. So if this is my subject, my inescapable subject, how do I not turn into just diaristic tripe that's already been done before? How do I stop screaming into the wind? How do I not drive people away with this, bra burning feminist? I still had this very 80s idea of what a feminist was and if it was okay to be one or to even say the word. But what if in that collision there can be some kind of critical distance that just let me paint? Like, what had I learned and who from? I had recently been to the Courtauld, where I'd spent a bunch of time in front of Cecily Brown's large commission and also a triptych of Oscar Kokoschka's called Prometheus. There was something in the confluence of these influences that had stayed really sticky. First, I did some further reading by Cecily Brown. So this is Cecily Brown's work at the Courtauld at the top here. This piece right here, it's up on the very top of the staircase. And this here, these are just some of my influences. So this is Titian's Rape of Europa, which I saw in 2021 in the show Love, Desire, Death at the National Gallery. This is the Kokoschka piece, which is this gorgeous giant triptych that they had hung from the ceiling at the Courtauld. So seeing the Kokoschka opposite Cecily Brown was a truly fantastic collision. It was like an ellipsis that I could follow, which, by the way, is how you come to your PhD question, isn't it? It's the logical next step for you. It's the question that you have. In the center here is The Defeat and Death of Maxentius by Peter Paul Rubens, which is at the Wallace collection with a bunch of other little sketch paintings that are just brilliant. And I had spent a lot of time sitting in front of this painting. And then this is Artemisia Gentileschi's Susanna and the Elders, which I of 1610, which I saw, my final work for the MCA for the RCA grad show was in response to. Sorry, just getting my brain back online there. Right. So first, I did some further reading by Cecily Brown, whose work I did not know beyond that piece in the Courtauld. I loved the images that I found in the books. I've still not seen actually another work of hers in the flesh, but what really struck me was what happened when I read something that she said to another artist in conversation. And actually, I just want to say that I think lots of times when we're reading about practice and what practice means and how artists practice, we're reading non-artists talking about artists' work and translating what they think their work means. And I think it's incredibly valuable if you can find artists talking about their own practice in those clear terms. My practice is, or in my practice, I. That's what we as artists should be paying attention to. Otherwise, we're taking advice from people that are not in our field, who are explaining to us what our brief kind of should be. I think this is one of the reasons why I got so lost, because I thought I needed a translator for my own work. And Cecily Brown changed that for me when I read this thing that she said with this other artist in conversation. She said, "Oh, I just think, oh, that's Titian's toenail or those ducks from that Rubens painting." And suddenly I was shocked. I understood what she was saying because I had spent the last 4 years copying this Rubens painting and this Titian painting, these two paintings right here. And I had hated myself for doing it. Why copy these works? No one paints like this anymore. Nobody cares. How in the world can Rubens be an influence on me today in 2023-24? But hearing Brown say that made me free, free like I am in my writing, where I break form and change thought mid stride, where I have the confidence to trust my skill set. At one point, when I had been painting figuratively in LA in the 1990s, I had been bold like this. It was not popular to paint figuratively then or there. And there was something subversive and therefore freeing about painting. So these disparate threads of my life joined up through the fabric of this group, the Wild Parlour, through the framework of rupture, which is really Jonathan's questions made manifest for me. Suddenly, I was painting. And my notes say to go back to slide 1, and that's to show you guys that this is the first painting. Hang on, we'll get there. So you can see here, if you look up here on the top, this is The Slaughtered Ox by Rembrandt. You know, I just gathered up all of my favorite resources and printed them out and scattered them all over the floor of my studio, like leaves that had fallen out of a tree. And I'm a very tidy person, and I generally don't have stuff all over the place. I make really neat, discrete piles. But I started walking through them and kicking them and just picking whatever flipped up and then working with it and just enjoying it, and sort of looking at it, painting halfway through it, dropping it, and moving on again, just to see what Cecily Brown's spark would set off in me with my own paint pots of mark making and interests that I had accumulated over the years. So I didn't look too much at Brown. I didn't look too closely or too much because I was afraid of painting like her. But I did print some of her stuff out and mix it in with about 100 of those references of the paintings that I had enjoyed working from. The tumbling, roiling catastrophe of Rubens' colonial conquest, bounty and victory. It's a perfect encapsulation of the patriarchal values of empire, control, consolidation of dynasty and powers, and the victors writing history. I chose Titian's Rape of Europa to respond to, as Titian was King Philip of Spain's main pornographer. Those images that I first saw in the National Gallery in 2021, in Love, Desire, Death, had been painted for his private bedchamber, and they were not meant to be seen in public. So suddenly, I was free to make. Thanks, Cecily. I made these works on sutured Belgian linen, like Rubens, like Titian. I sized with rabbit skin glue. At first, I rendered them up from a figure and departed from there, and now I work directly. The suture has remained an important polemic, pulling together that which is trying to be torn apart, like my body through so many surgeries, like my gendered body passing through the patriarchal framework of this world, like my body before I realized I was non-binary and therefore could stop masking. When I dropped my many masks of autism, I dropped my mask of gender, and I became whole enough to paint. Now I know what Kate of the future, who has a practice, feels like as they walk along the sidewalk. They're so invested in their work that they don't worry if it's good. They're focused on the making, the doing, the being. They fight for the studio. They apologize to their friends. They do their best. They show up whenever they can and make space for others to show up. They work continuously, but not for the sake of making, not in the hope of having someone say, yeah, like that, or, oh, I understand, but simply to paint. Painting, I have realized, is not language. The word language had been the very thing tripping me up. It is slightly ironic then that it is a writing course that taught me that the language of painting borrowed that word because there is no word for what it is to squeeze lived experience through the sieve of your practice and arrive at an image or object which speaks the world on its own terms, stained and formed in part by that lived experience. the finer mesh of my recent preoccupations, whatever that may be. Things like Buto or cold water swimming. How does that show up in painting? The paintings then arise roughly in this manner. I find images from evidentiary collections, victim impact statements, dark shit on the web that should not be there, otherwise known as trophy images, my own memory, and popular entertainment. I cut and repair the canvas and I size it. I render her up in chalk like Rubens, I turn her in the light like Titian, and then I keep going. I keep going until she is atomized out of that final injustice, the trappedness in her final moment, the thing that came to define a life that was full of so much more than that one single moment. I free her into space. But what space? The space of where there must be a safe passage, and this is why I build the templums. They're containers of souls freed, ours and those freed from the images, roaming together, making a new way to be in the world. So, this is my studio floor. So here are my leaves that I kick across the floor. It's my favorite painting. This, you'll find this sort of foreshortened shoulder and hoof across all my paintings, and this big stroke of the belly. I love making that mark from his collarbone, and then this intersecting sash of the saddle. Yeah, it's a gorgeous painting. See it at the Walls collection. So I thought that I would take you really quickly through the templum so that you can see this practice as the punctuating breath that it has become in my practice. And oh, by the way, I got in to Leeds. That is, I missed the deadline to Ruskin because I thought it was midnight, but it was at noon. So this was the last devastating blow that my ego needed. I needed to let go of the best school and proving myself. My ADHD stood right up and handed me that gift, landing me suddenly in a feminist powerhouse with Griselda Pollock at my side, right where I should be. Leeds is an incredible school, and I'm grateful to be there. So let me share this with you, if you can see this. So this is, I built this, as you can see, from the 10th of July to the 22nd of September in 2024. So I won a residency at Orleans House Gallery, and it was 10 weeks long, and we got to spend the first 4 weeks building, and we were also open to the public while we were building. This is what it sort of looked like when it was finished, part of it, but it's a very convoluted, othered space. I built the first templum that was called a templum for Wild Parlour at Rupture Exhibit in the back space. It took, I think, 10 days to build, and it was up for 6 days. It's made out of aluminum armature wire with craft paper stretched over it. And you can see, so I used the same paper again and again, and she's repaired every time, and she has these incredible battle wounds and scars. The paper is sutured together on an industrial machine like my body is, in these massive 8-meter by 8-meter sheets, and then it's clipped into place, and then we hot glue it into these formulated shapes. And it makes these really strange sort of, it feels like body, it feels like time, it feels like caverns and caves. And people would come in and they would just hang out and sit down for hours. We had to throw them out. So this is sort of what it looks like underneath the skin. And this is my lovely crew. So we had up to 12 people building on it over the course of 44 continuous days, which was really epic. So it's Ella and Olivia, my partner Tom, and here's the lovely and talented Sally Minns. This is my friend Sarah. So we got just people that weren't necessarily artists. That's my buddy from yoga. She came in, handed her a glue gun, go over here, get to work. Because trust is a big part of my practice. So Dave, also a yoga buddy, built our first ever level change, and we got to work. So uncovered This image I really love. This is what it looks like from the top before I papered over so you couldn't see it. It looks like clouds in the sunset. One day when I do something in a really big space, I want to build a catwalk so you can go look and see the inside that you're not supposed to see. And here's all the binder clips. You can see we used thousands and thousands of binder clips. So it took 15 kilograms of hot glue, I think 4,000 meters of aluminum armature wire, and 6,000 meters of sewn, crumpled, and uncrumpled craft paper. And then we'd stretch it over, and then we would form it into these wonderful shapes, sort of free form. There's all three of us building it together. And Sally sewing the cushions. And this desk right now is at, it was custom built invigilator desk, which is now at Rupture Exhibit. So when you come visit and have tea, you'll see it out there in the garden. And it was a truly incredible experience. But the reason that it really mattered was that it made a container for us to make a space, a temple of contemplation, where you can lay down your bias and consider a world in which we stop oppressing each other, in which this character doesn't have to say, is there homophobia in Hollywood and misogyny? Of course there is. It's in all our narratives. Like, what if that wasn't true anymore? What if we had other narratives that we could get obsessed with? And making this space was a space for people to just come and think about whatever it was that they needed to think about. We also build these offerings and sort of bless the space every time, so that the offering is there basically to protect you when you come in vulnerable enough to think the world in a new way, because we hold our biases in order to stay safe. So there has to be something else to keep you safe if you're going to let go of your biases. This was down in the burrow underneath the level change. We left it with this big baggy ceiling, and it sort of felt like an ovipod when you found it. You crawled in there. And we had all different kinds of artists come in and activate the space with us. So this is a group called Atmosphera, who came in and held a kirtan, which was amazing. And we held workshops out on the lawn and in the forest, talking about practice, meditation, and letting go. We held artist talks. And this is the very last piece that I put on. I built on it until I had to stop building on it, and then we just continuously repaired it. We had over 5,500 people come through it in about 6 weeks, and we think that we've underestimated that by quite a lot. This is Nick Parkin playing live in the space. He is a professor at Goldsmiths who is really incredibly talented, and he builds soundscapes, and he made the voice of the templum. And just like I did with Jess Martin before at Wild Parlour's show, Alternative Airport, I didn't hear the sound that was going to play every half hour in the templum until it was delivered, and we were 2 weeks into the build already. So something else I've learned about my practice is that it has to do with collaboration and trust. And saying, what would you do in this space? So here's Marie Gabrielle Roti and Yumino Seiki dancing Buto in the space and interacting with her, with the templum. And we had these cushions spread all over the floor, and they were shaking the piece, grabbing onto it. And people left just absolutely transported and dumbfounded. And it was such an honor to build something, yeah, like that. There's Yumino afterward, and that's my mom. She came to see it. Anyway, so that's oh, and we did storytelling too up in another piece. So this is a little place called The Kiss, and this is the storyteller seat. So I did something called the long read here. You can see these guys all tucked in. I read for about 90 minutes, just told stories up there. And then we held kids workshops. Anyway, so that is yeah, that's my story about how the Wild Parlour really helped me to find and understand my practice and stop looking for help and answers from an other space and know that all of the answers that I need are with me.